What's up everyone, it's Endymion, and in terms of the entertainment industry, it's full of paid shills pushing their politics and nonsense onto everyday consumers, while complaining that when their projects fail, it's because the audience is bigoted or racist instead of realizing their own faults. This has become the new unfortunate status quo for today's modern entertainment, with places like Disney infusing their projects with ESG at every possible opportunity, which may be raising their social credit score, but it's alienating and tanking their businesses. This nonsense has crossed over to every facet of media, from games pushing concepts like picking your pronouns, to entire franchises like the MCU transforming into girl boss utopias. This has given rise to the new Hollywood actor meta, in the form of woke weirdos who think everyone who disagrees with them is a bigot like Simu Liu and walking calamities like Rachel Zegler. These new age actors wouldn't survive in the Hollywood of old, not because of their ethnicities, but because they'd have to stand on more than their shaky morals that are dictated by the social contagion that infests the human consciousness. Thankfully, the sobering reality at the heart of all of this is that audiences aren't just tired, but they're refusing to pay. And what the audience wants versus what these creators are tasked with pushing is like oil and water, and neither side is willing to budge. The rise of woke identity politics in every facet of our entertainment has been rising faster than a priest seeing his choir boys every Sunday. And it's gotten to a point where it's harder to locate media that doesn't bend the knee these days than ever before. But the good news is that a lot of this nonsense is failing, and until the global elites Dr. Evil their way into creating some kind of mind control weapon, audiences are going to keep echoing the motto of our current day, which is when you go woke, you go broke. And amidst all of this turmoil, there's one actor who's saying things that feel alien in today's world, which is Ian McKellen, the man who famously played Magneto in the X-Men movies and was born to play Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. Ian, who's gay by the way, seems to have one of the most base takes in Hollywood. And I figured we'd decipher what Gandalf himself has to say about the current state of media today, and how his viewpoints could save a dying industry that's on its knees begging for mercy. From bounding into comics, we have this article titled, "Ian McKellen explains his job as an actor is not to presume to tell the audience what to think ever in anything I do." Comments from Ian McKellen's interview from 2003 have resurfaced when he was promoting Return of the King. And his viewpoints sound alien in today's world, but not only is it refreshing to hear, but his words prove that media these days has forgotten to entertain their customer first and lecture them instead. The reporter asked Ian, what is the one message that you would like the audiences to get, the one thing that will be the legacy of the Lord of the Rings movies, to which Ian said, and I quote, "I wouldn't presume to tell an audience what to think ever in anything I do. I am not a politician, I'm an actor, and I work on behalf of people who do the writing, who have the message. My job is not to tell the audience anything, it's just to explain the person I'm playing beyond the side of the character I'm playing. Good or bad, I don't judge the character. When I played Richard III, I didn't say I'm going to tell the audience why they shouldn't like tyranny and dictators. I just got on with explaining why Richard III turned out to be the way he was. And the same with Gandalf. Do my best to impersonate them, but I can't anticipate the audience's reaction," end quote. His comments here sound completely opposite of today's modern actors, who, like Rachel Zegler, are paid shills who parrot talking points in order to gain that sweet ESG score. I don't really need to tell you much about why people hate Rachel Zegler, but she is evidently the complete opposite to someone like Ian McKellen. Whereas Gandalf himself cared deeply about his craft and ensuring he stayed true to what was on the page, Zegler instead throws the book into the fire and instead uses the source material as a stepping point to push her politics. And the same could be said about movies like Blue Beetle, where the cast was happy there was barely any white people on set. Or the Rings of Power showrunners who called their critics evil because they strayed too far from the source material. We're living in a time where the source material is no longer really relevant when it comes to making something that audiences will enjoy. But instead, the source material is unfortunately viewed as a scapegoat by activists. as a convenient opportunity to use something that already has an established fan base that they can expose their politics into. This is why the Snow White remake isn't about a young woman being saved by a prince, but instead she's now being written as a revolutionary future leader who will lead her kingdom instead. The source material doesn't matter anymore, only the skeletal frame in which activists can infest and puppet around to say their politics and shove it down people's throats. After all, Zegler said things like,
"You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?"
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
And now let's compare this to Gandalf himself again, as Ian's comments here were further explored in another article from Bounding titled, Gandalf actor Ian McKellen explains he read J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings every night to prepare for the role. Ian was asked by the reporter how it was like being the wise man on set who had all the answers, but Ian believed otherwise. He said, and I quote, "The wise man was director Peter Jackson. I mean, every morning you would arrive on set, no matter how early you got there, you got down in costume, and Peter would be sitting down in his chair. There's video monitors that he watched the proceedings on, reading a book. It was always the same book, Lord of the Rings, always. But I could match him because I had a pocket in Gandalf the Grey's costume that I kept my Lord of the Rings in. So the night before, I'd look up the scene we were going to do and see if there was anything in the Tolkien that I thought had been missed, or overlooked, or could enhance what we got. And if you could point to a particular line and say, could we not have this back in the script and it was written by Tolkien, Peter almost always said, of course. But he was the authority and it's his movie, it's his vision of Tolkien. Every basic decision passed across his desk, but he isn't a tyrant. And like all good directors, he casts well. I don't just mean the actors, but heads of departments, so people he could totally rely on. No one was sacked during this. He picked the right person right along the line, and you cannot overestimate Peter and his total mastery. What would happen is we would have this not argument but discussion, and if he didn't persuade me or vice versa, then what would happen is we'd both do it both ways and then he could pick which he wanted to use. But I do trust his taste so much. I think he's got wonderful taste. I'm happy to say he made the right decisions, but I think sometimes there's subtlety in my performance, so maybe I did win out every so often, end quote. Just listening to what McKellen and director Peter Jackson did here is insane when you compare it to today's adaptations. A director and actor both nerding out on set, decked out in full costume, reading the book constantly like it's the Bible while adapting it. As opposed to today, where oftentimes many creatives are actively told not to read the source material of what they're adapting. A good recent example of this is Marvel's Secret Invasion, where the director of the series, Ali Salim, openly stated he was told not to read the comics that his series was based on. And to the surprise of no one, the show flopped, and not only did it emasculate Nick Fury, it ended its run by creating the ultimate all-in-one girl boss superhero in the form of Gaia, who has all the powers of the Guardians of the Galaxy, Children of Thanos, the Avengers, and probably more that I'm missing as well. Like, how bullshit of a character is that? Something like this would never exist in something like Peter Jackson's Ring movies. But again, that's because he actually read the damn thing he was adapting in the first place. Just comparing the Lord of the Rings movies to Rings of Power is genuinely unfair as far as quality goes, because Rings of Power is an expensive fanfiction that destroys the franchise it's based on. But what I do think is important to realize here is how starkly different the quality and reception of a franchise can become based on who's adapting it. When you get the man who treats the source material like gospel, you get 3 Academy Awarded films that beautifully tell its story while enhancing the source material to great heights. On the other hand, the same source material in the wrong hands can also result in a bastardization that ruins the core fundamentals of its own existence. And when looking at the difference between Jackson's Rings and Amazon's, it's the perfect encapsulation of today's modernized take on media. The Snow White remake is not unique either. since in a lot of ways what I just explained with Powers puts the Snow White remake in direct unison with it. And like I said before, these new adaptations of beloved properties don't exist to enrich the audience or the lore. They are simply viewed as convenient modern-day Trojan horses for woke activists to operate, so they can infiltrate established fan bases and disperse their moronic political ideologies in hopes of creating more like them. Because, let's be real, as of the past few years, many of these woke remakes haven't worked. And yet, even when woke creators make their own original series, like The Pride for example, they not only lack any creative originality, but exist solely to push political messaging. The Pride is an all-gay superhero team made by a gay creator to explicitly push the concept of gay representation. They don't exist as a team because of their differences like the Justice League or Avengers that are clearly inspirations for this nonsense. But instead, it's their similarity that unites them, which is their sexual identities. This comic alone explains why woke identity politics don't work. Because they don't see people as unique individuals and can only fathom the existence of others when they all have the same identities, values, and motivations. Basically, to put it simply, these woke creators can only create characters or ideas that essentially fit into the concept of a literal hive mind. The individuality of someone is secondary to the push of the message instead. And it's why so many things fail these days, because they're not made to entertain you, but to simply push politics instead. Rings of Power doesn't exist because Amazon wanted to do Lord of the Rings fans justice. It exists because it's a property with an established fan base that allows its writers to infuse their politics into. Because if they were told to make their own fantasy series without the legacy of something so sacred like Lord of the Rings behind it, they know nobody would watch it. Not because it's not an established IP, but because woke creators are clearly not talented enough to create their own unique material that challenges or rivals the classics. This is why things like the Snow White remake, Simulu pushing gender ideology desperately in order to stay in the industry, and other morons do what they do. It's simply being done because the people in charge of making stuff don't have the creative talent to make new things. What's that line from Lord of the Rings? Evil cannot create anything new, they can only corrupt and ruin what good forces have invented or made? That's about as perfect of a quote as it gets to today's modern media landscape. And like I've explained in previous videos, people do want unique stories and new ideas. They are even open to new stories within established franchises as long as the stories being told are respectful of the source material. A great example of this is the game developer CD Projekt Red, who has created games like The Witcher Trilogy and Cyberpunk 2077. Think about it. The Witcher games take place after the novels. By definition, they are fan fiction in the eyes of novel purists. Yet the stories CD told within those games respected what came before it and resulted in a highly successful trilogy that celebrates the source material. Then you have Cyberpunk 2077, which is based on a tabletop game created by Mike Pondsmith. While he created the world and the rules in which the cyberpunk universe exists within, CD Projekt took his world and created their own story and concepts within it. By definition, in the eyes of tabletop RPG purists, Cyberpunk 2077 is technically just expensive fan fiction. But the difference between The Witcher and Cyberpunk as opposed to Snow White's remake or Rings of Power is that the creatives enhanced the source material and successfully created new stories within established worlds that honored their legacies. You could even say the same thing about games like Baldur's Gate 3 for example as well. By definition, BG3 is made by Larian Studios. Yet it's based on the Dungeons & Dragons IP, which Larian doesn't own obviously, but they license it out from Wizards of the Coast. And in doing so, they took an established world the same way Amazon did with Tolkien or anything else really, and they created their own story within it by using the rules and lore of the world that it's set within. Sure, they had fun with it, but it's resulted in one of the highest rated RPGs of all time. So I don't want to hear the excuse that audiences don't want new stories and things they love. Because it's evidently true that this is not the case, because by this definition, then the Insomniac Spider-Man games shouldn't exist either. Because again, they're games with original stories told in a world that Insomniac doesn't own. In this case, of course, Marvel Comics and Spider-Man, but they took something and like CD did with Witcher or Cyberpunk or Larian did with Baldur's Gate, they successfully created, expanded, and became successful in telling a story with an established IP with a built-in fanbase. But the difference between Insomniac's Spider-Man and the woke disasters of today is that the majorly successful reinventions of established franchises got to where they are not by attacking the material and its fans, but by being made by people who clearly actually love the things that they're working on. I guarantee people at CD Projekt Red, Larian, or Insomniac have many people on staff who've read the lore and consumed the media about the things they love. Like Ian McKellen, they too keep a copy of the lore nearby and treat it not as a doorstep but for what it should be instead, which is a respected Bible that should never be tarnished, reduced, or ridiculed, but instead celebrated, enhanced, and loved. And this is a stark difference between the woke, nonsensical remakes that fail constantly and the amazing adaptations of media we love. In the end, I could have easily just summed up this entire video by just saying, just don't go woke because you'll go broke, but obviously that wouldn't have been long enough for a video. I just hope this helps people understand why the excuses of woke weirdos is nothing but bullshit that means absolutely nothing. Rachel Zegler is not a victim because of the backlash. She's just another idiot who believed she knew more about the thing she's adapting. Ian McKellen's thought process, thankfully, is still alive in certain corners of the industry. But for every 10 woke disasters, remember to instead spend your money on games and media that actually cares about what they're adapting. So thank you for watching, my dear friends, and remember to never go woke or you'll absolutely go broke. Like the video to help the channel out, subscribe for more, and have a great day. Evil can never create, and I'll be damned if I won't stop fighting back. So thank you, and I will see you in the next one.